Hi, and welcome to Pro Tips with Pete Thorne. This week I've been inspired by a blog post over by photographer Chase Jarvis, and he's been looking at these sort of moving images, which are known as cinemagraphs, where through a variety of masking techniques, some film or video has been frozen, leaving just one part of the picture animated. And these are able to be posted on websites as GIFs. So, want to know how to make one? Brilliant. Well, I taught myself in a few minutes, so I'm going to teach you. To complete this tutorial, you will need a short movie clip, Photoshop CS5, patience, and a great album to listen to whilst you're working. Okay, fire up Photoshop and go select video frames to layers. Choose your file and make a small selection. Don't go too many frames, you only want a few for this. And make sure you click limit to every 2 frames and make sure that make frame animation is selected in a checkbox. That will create your file for you and you'll have one layer for every frame of the animation. And I'll just speed this up because it takes forever. When your file is imported, you will see all the frames displayed at the bottom in a timeline and in the right hand side as layers. Now I'm just going to select the layers that I do not need for this animation, and I'm going to delete them, and I'm going to do the same with the frames that I don't need, leaving me with just 17 frames and 17 corresponding layers. I'm now going to use the playback controls in the timeline to demonstrate the animation at the moment. Now, you will need to decide what part of the animation you wish to keep. And in my case, I'm going to choose this stream of water coming out of the fire hose, and I want everything else in the image to be static. So I'm just going to choose a frame that I'd like to keep as my base layer. And this is going to be one where I can see the fireman standing up and a little bit of his face in profile just as he turns. In this case, the layer that I have selected is number 11, so I'm going to duplicate that and rename it to base layer and place it right at the bottom of this stack of images in my layers palette. And once I've done that, I'm going to create a group for all the other layers in this image. And the reason I'm going to create a group for these images is so that I can apply a mask to all of them, so I only get the parts of the layers that I want to be animated in my final result. If you have chosen an image where you have an object that moves across the scene, this will be a lot harder because you will have to create an individual layer mask for every single frame of your animation. It just depends how complicated you want to make your task. So with my base layer selected, I'm now going to mask off the areas that I want to animate. In this case, the stream of water and a small control at the top of the ladder. And when I've finalized my selection, I'm just going to select the animated layers group in my layers palette and create a new mask for that layer based on the selection. My layer mask will apply to all the animated layers and therefore to every frame of the animation. But one thing you may have noticed is that the individual frames are not lined up on top of each other. This is because I was shooting handheld with a long telephoto lens, and therefore my images don't line up, and I need to fix that. So one by one, I'm going to select the frames from the bottom of the screen and select the layer that corresponds to that frame in my layers palette, and I'm going to move it, just nudge it up, left, right, etc. until it lines up perfectly with my base layer. Then when I've completed each layer, I move on to the next, and so on and so forth. It will be much easier to see how the layers should line up if you zoom in, and that allows you to pinpoint exact markers on both layers to match up. In this case, I used a specular highlight on the rail to make sure the control was in place. Once you've aligned any wayward frames, you can then use the playback control in the bottom left to view your movie so far. Now there's a few changes I want to make here. As you can see, the smoke was moving around, changing, and I'll need to mask off a few of these layers individually to make sure that it looks as good as it can be. And to do this, all I do is select the frame from the timeline, then the layer that corresponds to that frame, add a new layer mask, and then just paint on the mask in order to make sure that it blends in perfectly with the background. And repeat for any remaining frames that need adjusting. Right, that's the hard part of the process completed. And I've just added a curves adjustment and a saturation adjustment to boost the colours and contrast in my animation. And now we're just going to get this prepared for the web. So first step, reduce the size a little and pick a nice, sensible, small file size, because we're going to be saving this as an animated GIF file, and they tend to be a little on the heavy side. They're not compressed as well as say your MPEG or your H.264 movie files will be. So we're going to reduce that size, and then last step is to export this to save for web or mobile devices. And here we are. I'm going to choose perceptual GIF and render save. Thank you for watching, and if you follow the steps in this tutorial to make your own work, post it on Twitter with the hashtag #ProTips.